Most people spend years chasing respect from the wrong direction. They push harder, explain themselves more, and try to demonstrate their worth through effort and compliance. The tragic irony is that the harder they chase it, the faster respect moves away. You have likely witnessed this pattern before. Perhaps you have lived through it personally. Someone attempts to earn approval through generosity, patience, and constant justification. Instead of appreciation, the other side becomes bolder. They press further, demand more, and test limits with increasing confidence. What was intended as strength becomes interpreted as weakness. The effort to gain respect quietly turns into an invitation to be challenged. Opponents rarely admire the person who begs for recognition. They respond differently to the one who appears indifferent to it. This observation is not comforting, but it reflects a persistent psychological truth. People measure power not by how loudly it is claimed, but by how little it appears to depend on validation. Niccolo Machiavelli wrote with striking clarity about this dynamic centuries ago. He was not concerned with how society should ideally behave. He described how human behavior actually unfolds when ambition, rivalry, and competition enter the picture. His insights remain uncomfortable because they strip away comforting illusions. Kindness in conflict is rarely interpreted the way people hope. In neutral situations, it can strengthen relationships. But inside power struggles, repeated softness sends a different signal. It suggests that pressure will eventually succeed. Individuals who seek advantage read that signal carefully. If a person shows they can be pushed, many adversaries will continue pushing until resistance appears. However, aggression alone does not solve the problem either. Responding to every provocation with visible anger produces another kind of weakness. It reveals that the aggressor has located the emotional switch that moves you. Each reaction proves that your mood, your composure, and your focus can be shifted by someone else's pressure. That is not authority. It is dependence disguised as strength. So what actually commands respect in adversarial environments? It is psychological positioning. The individual who remains calm when the room becomes chaotic creates a subtle imbalance. When everyone else moves impulsively, the patient observer appears to operate on a deeper level. Their actions suggest calculation rather than reaction. People around them begin sensing that a larger strategy is unfolding even if they cannot fully understand it. Machiavelli described this as quiet control over circumstances. Influence emerges not from volume or confrontation, but from positioning. The person who controls the conditions surrounding an interaction shapes the outcome long before the argument begins. Those who master even a portion of this approach notice something unusual. Opponents begin adjusting their behavior without direct confrontation. Hostility becomes less frequent. Challenges become more cautious. The adversary senses that attacking recklessly will not produce the result they expected. The first step toward this shift is understanding frames of interaction. Every conversation exists inside an invisible structure. A frame determines the premise beneath the discussion. It defines who must defend themselves, who holds authority, and whose perspective is assumed to be correct. Most conflicts are decided at the level of this frame rather than the words exchanged inside it. Imagine someone publicly questioning your decision in front of others. On the surface, it sounds like a simple inquiry. Beneath the words, however, sits a hidden premise. The premise suggests that your judgment is questionable and requires explanation. If you immediately begin defending your decision, you have already accepted the frame. Your response confirms that the premise deserves attention. From that moment onward, you are no longer arguing your position. You are operating inside a narrative constructed by someone else. No matter how articulate your explanation becomes, the structure of the conversation already favors the person who set the frame. This pattern explains why many people feel they are losing ground in arguments even when their reasoning is sound. The problem is rarely the strength of their logic. The problem is the structure of the conversation itself. Strategic thinkers refuse to operate inside unfavorable frames. They recognize the hidden premise and quietly shift the interaction onto different ground. Instead of defending themselves within the narrative offered to them, they speak from a position that assumes their authority remains intact. This does not require confrontation. It requires composure. When someone attempts to trap you within their frame, respond from a broader perspective that diminishes the premise. Redirect the conversation toward the larger context rather than accepting the narrow accusation. By doing so, you replace the frame with one that you control. History offers many examples of leaders who instinctively used this method. When critics attempted to confine them inside hostile narratives, they refused to argue on that terrain. Instead, they expanded the conversation beyond the trap. The original accusation became irrelevant once the discussion moved to a wider level. In daily life, this principle appears in small but powerful ways. You decline to justify every decision to individuals who approach you with skepticism rather than curiosity. You refuse to shrink your posture simply because someone implies you owe them an explanation. You respond calmly without validating the premise that your authority is under review. Before reacting to criticism or provocation, pause briefly and ask a quiet question inside your mind. Am I about to enter a frame someone else created for me? If the answer is yes, step back from the trap. Speak from your own perspective rather than defending the one they offered. Over time, this habit produces noticeable effects. Individuals who try to provoke you find their usual strategies ineffective. The conversational handles they expected to grab simply are not available. Their narrative fails to hold you in place. And when people realize their frames cannot contain you, they begin recalibrating how they approach you. The interaction changes without a single raised voice. Another discipline that quietly reshapes how adversaries treat you is strategic indifference. Many people understand this idea intellectually, yet very few practice it when tension appears. The difference between knowing it and living it is where power is either preserved or surrendered. Every provocation contains a test. Someone throws a remark, a criticism, or a subtle insult to see whether it can reach inside your emotional state. The moment you react visibly, even if your response sounds logical, you reveal that the pressure found its mark. The aggressor now knows where your edge lies. From that point forward, the same pressure point can be pressed again and again. Reaction communicates more than people realize. It tells the other person that they possess the ability to shift your internal state. They learn that a certain tone, accusation, or tactic produces movement. Once that discovery is made, it becomes leverage. Machiavelli observed this repeatedly in political life. Leaders who reacted emotionally to every criticism weakened themselves because they demonstrated how easily they could be moved. The provocateur did not even need to win the argument. It was enough to show that their words had the power to disturb. Strategic indifference breaks that cycle, but indifference is often misunderstood. It is not suppressed anger. It is not cold silence used as punishment. Those responses still communicate emotional engagement. They reveal that something landed. True indifference comes from redirected attention. When your mind is invested in larger priorities, small provocations lose their gravity. They stop competing for your focus. The aggressor throws a comment expecting friction, yet the remark falls into empty space. There is no reaction to amplify it. This absence of reaction becomes a statement stronger than confrontation. It says without words that the matter does not deserve your energy. The effect on the other person is subtle but powerful. They expected a response that would confirm their influence. Instead, they encounter neutrality. Their tactic produced no result. The psychological equation fails. When this happens repeatedly, confusion appears. The aggressor begins wondering whether their efforts are even noticed. They may push harder temporarily, hoping to provoke something. Yet without emotional feedback, the effort quickly becomes exhausting. There is also a public dimension to this dynamic. Visible hostility between two people often elevates both of them to equal status in the conflict. When you fight every attack openly, you inadvertently grant your opponent significance. Observers assume the conflict must be important because it consumes your attention. Indifference changes that perception completely. When you remain composed and continue focusing on your own direction, the observer's interpretation shifts. Instead of seeing two people locked in battle, they see one person moving forward while another struggles to gain attention. Authority grows quietly in that contrast. Maintaining this discipline requires awareness in the moment. Your instinct may urge you to answer immediately. Pride often demands that accusations be corrected on the spot. Yet short-term emotional satisfaction rarely produces long-term advantage. When provocation appears, pause internally and ask a simple question. Does responding strengthen my position or weaken it? Most of the time, the honest answer reveals that silence preserves more influence than argument. Another strategic principle closely related to indifference is patience. When people sense opposition, they often react too quickly. They confront immediately, expose their suspicions, and attempt to shut down the threat before it grows. While this impulse feels protective, it often destroys a valuable advantage. Early confrontation reveals information that should remain hidden. The moment you accuse someone of working against you, you reveal what you know. You expose which actions caught your attention and which details disturbed you. The opponent learns exactly where your awareness ends and where their behavior remains invisible. From that point forward, they adapt. They become more cautious. Their actions grow subtler. Whatever advantage you held through observation disappears. Machiavelli treated patience as a form of intelligence rather than passivity. Waiting allows events to reveal themselves naturally. Human beings rarely maintain careful deception forever. Over time, patterns emerge. A careless remark appears. A relationship reveals itself. An action exposes the underlying strategy. But these revelations occur only when the person believes they remain unobserved. The discipline here is restraint. Externally, you remain neutral. Your behavior toward the individual does not signal suspicion. You continue interacting normally without hostility or tension. Internally, you observe carefully. Notice who they speak with when seeking support. Watch how their behavior changes under pressure. Listen for contradictions between what they say and what they do. Each detail becomes part of a growing picture. Information accumulates quietly when observation replaces reaction. Eventually, the strategy they were attempting to conceal becomes visible. Perhaps they reveal their intentions through an alliance with the wrong person. Perhaps they act prematurely, believing no one understands their position. At that moment, you possess clarity rather than suspicion. Action taken with clarity is precise. Action taken with partial information is usually clumsy. The advantage gained through patience is asymmetry. You know something the other person does not know you know. That imbalance becomes powerful because it allows you to move decisively while they remain unaware of the full situation. Many people struggle with patience because waiting feels like surrender. In reality, patience is often preparation. The individual who observes more than they speak gradually understands the entire environment. The one who rushes to confront reveals their perspective before understanding the full map. Allowing someone to reveal themselves does not require manipulation. It requires silence and attention. People show their intentions eventually when they believe no one is watching closely. And when that moment arrives, the advantage belongs to the person who waited long enough to see clearly. Another shift that transforms how adversaries treat you is becoming a difficult target. Opponents rarely choose their conflicts randomly. They scan their surroundings looking for opportunity. They look for the person who reacts quickly, who shows obvious pressure points, who can be moved with predictable triggers. In every competitive environment, the same quiet rule applies. Pressure travels toward the easiest entry point. Predators in nature follow the identical logic. They circle the herd, observing movement, posture, and weakness. They do not attack the strongest animal in the center unless they are forced to. They move toward the one that appears isolated, distracted, or unsure of its own strength. Human conflict follows this same psychological pattern. Individuals who wish to undermine someone rarely attack the most grounded person in the room. They focus on those who display visible vulnerability. When someone reveals their frustrations openly, reacts quickly to criticism, or shows emotional instability under pressure, they unknowingly provide a map. That map shows exactly where the pressure should be applied. Becoming a difficult target begins with reducing that map. Most people reveal far more about themselves than they realize. They openly display what irritates them, what embarrasses them, and what makes them feel insecure. Each revelation becomes a guide for anyone who wishes to provoke them later. This does not mean you must become cold or secretive. It means practicing intentional restraint with what you reveal publicly. Your vulnerabilities are part of being human, but they do not need to become tools for someone else's strategy. Negotiators understand this instinctively. They never reveal the absolute limit they are willing to accept in a negotiation. Strategists operate the same way. They do not broadcast the exact point where pressure will break them. By protecting certain emotional boundaries, you remove the most obvious pathways for manipulation. The second layer of becoming a difficult target involves controlling visible reactions. Everyone experiences emotional responses internally. The difference between reactive people and disciplined ones lies in the gap between feeling and display. When you can experience emotion privately without broadcasting it publicly, you disrupt one of the most reliable feedback systems adversaries depend on. Attackers look for confirmation that their tactic landed. They observe facial expression, tone of voice, and body language, searching for evidence of disturbance. If the signal appears, they know the strategy works. If the signal never appears, uncertainty replaces confidence. Uncertainty discourages persistence. When someone tries a tactic repeatedly and cannot determine whether it affects you, the effort begins to feel wasteful. The cost of continuing rises because the outcome becomes unpredictable. Predictability attracts pressure. Uncertainty repels it. The third element is internal stability. This cannot be faked convincingly for long. People sense whether someone is grounded or merely performing confidence. True stability expresses itself through small signals. The pace of your movement, the steadiness of your gaze, the calmness of your breathing. These signals communicate that your foundation is firm. When adversaries encounter someone who carries that stability naturally, they reconsider whether the conflict is worth pursuing. Not because they admire the person yet, but because attacking someone who stands firm requires greater effort than finding a weaker target elsewhere. That recalculation is the beginning of safety. From safety grows the confidence that eventually turns into respect. Another crucial transformation involves shifting from reaction to positioning. Many people live in permanent reaction mode. Events occur and they respond. Someone attacks and they defend. A situation changes and they scramble to handle the immediate moment. This constant reaction keeps them trapped in short-term conflicts. Machiavelli illustrated this dynamic through the metaphor of a river. When a river floods suddenly, anyone who built nothing in preparation is swept away. But those who constructed channels and barriers beforehand can redirect the flow of water. They are not stronger than the river itself. They simply prepared before the flood arrived. Preparation creates control where reaction cannot. Positioning operates on the same principle. Instead of asking how to win the present argument, positioning asks a different question. Where do I want to stand months from now, and what must I build today to reach that place regardless of current conflicts? That shift transforms the entire strategy. When someone tries to undermine you, the reactive impulse focuses on defeating them directly. You counter every rumor, challenge every accusation, and expend enormous energy fighting a battle that keeps you fixed in place. Positioning changes the battlefield entirely. Instead of investing your effort into destroying the opponent, you invest it into strengthening your own foundation. You develop capabilities that increase your value. You build relationships rooted in trust rather than convenience. You expand your skills and influence so that your standing grows stronger over time. Eventually, something remarkable happens. The attacks that once felt threatening begin to lose their impact because they land on a structure that has become too solid to destabilize. You did not defeat the opponent through confrontation. You outgrew the conflict. Reactive individuals win moments. Strategic individuals win trajectories. The next principle concerns reputation. Before you enter any room, a version of you has already arrived. People carry impressions built from previous interactions, from stories shared by others, from the pattern of your behavior over time. That impression forms your reputation. Machiavelli considered reputation one of the most powerful and underestimated forms of influence. Not the reputation someone claims about themselves, but the one created through consistent action. People who constantly advertise their own strength rarely inspire belief. Self-promotion often signals insecurity rather than authority. True reputation spreads differently. It grows through observation. When others see you remain composed during difficult moments, they remember. When you keep your word consistently, that reliability becomes part of the narrative surrounding your name. When you treat people fairly even under pressure, witnesses carry that memory into future conversations. Each observation becomes a small piece of a larger picture. Over time, those pieces accumulate into a reputation that travels ahead of you. This matters deeply in relation to adversaries. Anyone considering moving against you performs an informal calculation. They ask others about your character. They watch how people around you respond to your presence. If the answer reveals that you are respected, dependable, and supported by strong relationships, the cost of attacking you rises sharply. Now the adversary must challenge not only you, but the network of trust surrounding you. Many choose a different target instead. Reputation functions like invisible armor. It protects you before the conflict begins. But this protection cannot be manufactured quickly. It grows slowly through consistency. Every promise kept, every calm decision under pressure, every act of fairness contributes to the structure of that armor. The final principle lies in controlling psychological atmosphere. Every environment carries an emotional tone that shapes how people think and behave inside it. You have felt this many times. Walk into one room and tension immediately fills the air. Enter another and calmness settles over the conversation even before words are exchanged. Atmosphere is rarely discussed, yet it governs the outcome of many interactions. The person with the greatest internal clarity often sets that atmosphere unconsciously. Machiavelli believed the deepest form of influence came from shaping the environment itself, rather than forcing individual actions. When the emotional tone of a space becomes stable and grounded, the behavior of everyone inside that space shifts accordingly. Some individuals create tension wherever they go. Their presence amplifies uncertainty. They introduce small disturbances that keep others slightly unsettled. This unstable influence is powerful temporarily but exhausting to maintain. Calm authority works differently. When someone enters a tense situation carrying genuine composure, people instinctively orient toward them. Human beings look for stability when uncertainty rises. The person who provides that stability becomes the natural anchor. Without commanding attention, they shape the interaction. Provocation struggles to survive in that atmosphere. Attempts to destabilize them fail because the emotional ground remains steady. Influence emerges quietly. Adversaries sense that their usual tactics produce no reaction. Their efforts dissolve without impact. Confusion replaces aggression. Respect often begins in that confusion. The deeper truth behind all these principles is simple. Respect rarely comes from confrontation alone. It grows from the perception that someone operates with strategic awareness rather than emotional impulse. When people sense that you are thinking several steps ahead, that your composure does not depend on external approval, and that your foundation cannot easily be shaken, their behavior changes. They may not understand why, but they begin adjusting around you. And that adjustment is the beginning of real influence.